Showers continuing elsewhere as well, but still a few clear spells, especially in the east. And this is where we're going to see some of the lowest temperatures as we go through tonight and to the start of the new working week, but still not expecting a frost around for Monday morning. So through Monday then, it's another day of sunshine and showers for many though. We will start to see those showers easing a little though along the south coast as we go through the day. Rain continuing still though across eastern parts of Scotland. They're becoming slightly more patchy in nature, and those winds now coming from the north across Scotland, so feeling slightly cooler here, still clinging on to something slightly warmer across the south though.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be back with you on GB News. Lovely to see you this morning. Now, as the UK prepares to host a major summit of world leaders on AI, I'm going to be asking the Science and Technology Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, whether we should all be fearful of its development. With Labour tearing itself apart over how to react to the war in the Middle East, I'll be joined by Khalid Mahmood. He's the Labour MP who is calling for a ceasefire and who helped to set up a meeting between Keir Starmer and Muslim Labour MPs earlier this week. And as Israel finally looks to be launching its ground offensive in Gaza, we'll get some expert analysis on what's next. I'll be asking the MOD's former Middle East advisor, Sir Simon Mail, how the conflict is likely to play out. And international lawyer Natasha Hausdorff will be joining us to discuss whether the invasion is legal. I'm also going to be joined in the studio by Jeremy Corbyn's former comms chief, James Schneider, and the news editor, in fact, of the Jewish News, Justin Cohen, who'll debate whether the government should be calling for a ceasefire in the first place. And John Howard, Australia's second longest-serving Prime Minister, is also going to be joining me. We're going to be discussing everything from Israel to how he thinks the Tories are doing here in the UK. So, to not put it mildly, it's a jam-packed show. Don't go anywhere. Get yourself a cup of tea, bed in, and do not miss the next 90 minutes. And to get us all kicked off, joining me now is my GB News colleague and associate editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. Piercey, as I like to call him.
Morning to you.
Morning. Lovely to see you.
My first time on this programme. I can't think why it's taken so long.
This is synergy. I love to see it happening. We're both associate editors, admittedly of rival newspapers, but there is quite a lot going on in the press this morning.
There is.
Obviously, we've got Israel and Gaza dominating, but this is a great story by your sister paper, The Mail, on Sunday. London jihad demo leader is NHS doctor. This is a guy who was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. It's not prescribed here, but it is banned in some countries.
12.
And lo and behold, The Mail on Sunday discovers that he's also a GP, but he operates under a different name, funnily enough, Andrew.
Yeah, he does. And so by day, he does his job, and we're very grateful he does his job, and we're sure he does it very well as a GP in Harrow in North London. But he's also the leader of the British group of this organisation that's been prescribed in 12 organisations, including Bangladesh. China, for God's sake, has banned this group. Russia, Turkey, and it shamelessly on its own website in the last 2 weeks, Camilla, talked about the great joy that the Gaza invasion of Israel had caused Muslims worldwide. Joy, it was an act of overt terrorism, and there we've got a GP whose job is to bring people's health back to normal, to care for people.
Yeah. To treat everyone equally.
To treat everyone equally. And this organisation also, they say they're not a terrorist organisation. Fine. They want one worldwide leader for the whole Muslim faith. But at demonstrations in the last 2 or 3 weeks, when he's been speaking, this GP, his supporters have been chanting for holy war, holy war. It's really disturbing.
I think it's disturbing also for Jewish doctors operating in the UK. We've done a story, I did a story myself, about a Harley Street doctor who'd kind of put this post on Instagram with a swastika alongside an Israel flag. It was absolutely disgusting. It's being investigated by the GMC. There's a story in the Telegraph today saying 3 different medical professionals are being investigated, not just by the GMC, but also the CST and the police. I mean, these people are on one hand working for the NHS and on the other on the streets of London, you know, sharing a platform at times with people who are, I don't know why we're making any bones about it, spewing out Jew hate. That's what it is.
Yeah, Jew hate. And let's not call it anti-Semitism. Let's call it Jew hate, because if you talk to some young people, Camilla, they don't know what anti-Semitism means. They don't know the expression. It is overt Jew-hating. A GP also, by the way, in law, has a duty to report any patient he suspects, or she suspects, is sidling into extremist behaviour.
Yeah.
Do we really think this guy, who is the leader of an organisation that's been banned in at least 12 worldwide organisations for peddling anti-Jew hate, is ever going to do that? I'm sorry,
Why don't
I
we
don't
ban
think
this
so.
organisation?
I don't know. Michael Gove, I've talked to Michael Gove about this many times. He's now, what is he, Levelling Up Secretary. He's been very vocal on this, saying it should be banned. Others say if you do that, it just causes more tension within the Muslim community. But I think we have to look very carefully at it,
especially at the moment.
There's also been a lot of anti-Semitism found on university campuses, which is something I'm going to ask Michelle Donnellan, because she was briefly Education Secretary.
For about 24 hours.
About 24 hours. But prior to that, she was Universities Minister, so she can hopefully comment on that. You mentioned Michael Gove there. There's a really interesting story on the front of the Sunday Telegraph. It's headline, Ministers plan extremism crackdown as fears grow over UK permitting anti-Jewish hate. Just what we were saying. So what are they planning? I think this is a link-up between Michael Gove and Suella Braverman.
Yeah. So that's the Home Secretary, who's never knowingly modest and pulling her punches. They're very concerned that the legislation we've got at the moment, 2015, 2011, is out of date. And they're worried that the police and the authorities don't have the power to intervene when they see problems on the street to do with hate crime. And I tell you, I think an issue they're going to have to look at, Camilla. Thousands of people taking part in those marches yesterday were wearing masks, or they had neckerchiefs and scarves wrapped around their faces. Why is that so? Why is that allowed? What are they hiding from? And I saw on a tube station myself 3 young men get onto the tube. They'd been to the march with their pro-Palestine flags, with all masked, started shouting abuse in the tube carriage, saying, anyone here from Israel, anyone here from Israel, could they please take their masks down if they're going to say that?
Hatred?
Of course it is. And we all stood there. What did I do? Nothing. Because I'm not as young as I used to be. Might have said something.
Well, people would be really intimidated. Also, why are people wearing balaclavas to peaceful protests?
Why are they? And I think this is all the things that Braverman and Gove want looked at, the language they're using. If people are chanting that sort of hatred in a tube carriage or in a space, should they be arrested? Should they be taken off the streets?
But do you get the impression that Braverman is frustrated as Home Secretary, that the police aren't taking more action against people? We've had Max Hill, who's the head of the CPS, and indeed the police, say there are different ways to interpret the shouting for jihad on the streets of London during a pro-Palestinian march. I mean, I don't know how else I would interpret it, but if it was somebody shouting it with a balaclava on and then going on to talk about revelling in terrorist atrocities against Israelis, I think I'd probably be worried about the word jihad being used.
I would, because it's about holy war, and yet she's being frustrated because the police, as ever in my view, always seem to err on the side of caution, always seem to err on the side of the offender. We have to go back to this doctor, by the way. His own Facebook talking about the violence igniting waves of joy and elation. That's got to be close to inciting...
Well, it's the glorification of terrorism, which under that old legislation, which I think Braverman and Gove, as you say, want to beef up, that would be classified. But I think if people are celebrating in the massacre of women, children and babies on the streets of London, then you would hope that the Met Police would step in and make some serious arrests.
Because there's no debate in this country about whether Hamas is a terrorist organisation. It is. Now, Jeremy Corbyn may struggle with that, former Labour leader, who might want to call them my friends. But
famously described Hamas and Hezbollah as friends.
But they are a terror organisation as recognised by this country, the European Union, the West, America, NATO, the United Nations. So this is why Braverman and co are very anxious. And I think Willie Shawcross did a review of the current terrorism legislation, and he said it's not strong enough, and we've got to get to grips with it. But I'm not so sure now that there would necessarily be the cross-party consensus that you might have expected, because we've seen, haven't we, in the last
well, there's not
few weeks.
There's not even inter-party consensus in the Labour Party. So let's just briefly talk about the dilemma that Starmer faces. He's got, I think, a quarter of his own MPs now calling for a ceasefire. He doesn't want to call for a ceasefire. He's instead talked about humanitarian pauses. How does he play this out, Lizzie?
It's very difficult because he's now got 3 very powerful figures, 3 of the most powerful people outside of Westminster: Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Sarwar, the leader in Scotland, and, of course, Sadiq Khan, who's got a very difficult election next year in London, in my view, all saying ceasefire, which is a flat contradiction of Starmer's position. Starmer, I think, is now becoming almost a minority in his own party, because although he wants people to think that the days of the Palestinian flag being flown at Labour conference in the bad old days of Corbyn have gone, this conflict is showing there's still huge sympathy for Gaza on the Labour benches, and still, I would argue, a great hostility to Israel. He's trying to present himself now as a world leader. Wasn't he strutting the stage a few weeks ago, meeting Macron and these sort of people?
If he appears to sort of flip-flop, because he has previously said that Israel's got a right to defend itself, then he's just going to look as if he's manoeuvring for political reasons rather than humanitarian ones.
I wonder what Tony Blair has told him to do, because they're on the phone a lot, aren't they?
You think he's the puppet master, right?
Yes, I do.
Well, let's move on to the Tories' woes. What on earth do we think Peter Bone is doing out campaigning with James Purseglove, who's a Tory minister, at the weekend? The Sunday Mirror have snapped them together. I mean, there's no crime in this, to be fair, Andrew, but it looks a little bit short-sighted, doesn't it?
Peter Bone has been suspended for allegations of bullying. He's been suspended from the Commons. He can't go into the Commons, so while but he's denied it.
Yes.
But there's a by-election coming up in his council by-election in his constituency. He's still a member of the Tory party.
Borough, I believe,
he's still a member of the Tory party. Tom Purseglove, who's the minister in the next-door constituency.
Sorry, I called him James Purseglove.
Tom Purseglove,
sorry.
A very fine Brexiteer, by the way.
Yes,
they
indeed.
both are. In the next-door constituency, thinks, well, he's still a member of the Tory party. We want the Tories to win the by-election, so I'm going to go and campaign with it.
The optics.
He didn't expect the Sunday Mirror to catch them in action. Lights, camera, action.
Well, the Mirror will do that, won't it?
And of course, the Mirror are desperate to stick any anti-Labour, any anti-Tory stuff on the front page because they know the splits in the Labour Party are going to become a very big issue.
But back to Starmer, how hard is this? Mate, you've got one job. You just keep your powder dry while the Tories implode, and yet his own party is now imploding itself.
And it's just when this war started, somebody said, this is a real problem for Rishi Sunak because it's going to drive the oil price up and all that. I said, hang on, this is going to expose the huge divisions in the Parliamentary Labour Party over their support for Israel.
Labour are definitely struggling much more with this issue than the Tories.
Done so much on anti-Semitism post-Corbyn, and now they've got the problem back again.
Let's talk about a happier story. You mentioned Tony Blair earlier. Happiest day of my life. Mandelson finally marries his partner of 27 years. Now, you've got a personal stake in the story, Andrew, so you wanted to pick it.
I wasn't surprised, it has to be said, not to get an invitation for the happy occasion. Well, all those years ago in 1998, when I was a young reporter, Peter Mandelson was outed as a gay man on Newsnight, BBC Newsnight, by Matthew Parris, a former Tory MP who's also gay, because there'd been a scandal involving a Labour cabinet minister who was gay. And Matthew Parris just said very casually, oh, everybody knows there are other gay cabinet ministers. Who says Jeremy Paxman? Peter Mandelson. Grown. Of course, lots of people, as we know, what we know in the Westminster bubble, Camilla, know one thing. Outside the Westminster bubble, they didn't know. Peter Mandelson was horrified. I was working on a newspaper you know very well at the time, the Sunday Express.
Great paper.
Edited by a very great woman journalist, Amanda Patel, and she said, how do we follow that up? I said, easy. We write a nice story about who his boyfriend is, which we did. It was Ronaldo. No problem there, because if a woman cabinet minister like Mo Mowlam had a new boyfriend, the papers were all over it. Oh, but you write about Peter Mandelson. He was a very, very powerful figure in New Labour, and he doesn't want people to know he's gay. You're in trouble. 4 weeks later, Amanda Patel was mysteriously fired from that newspaper. And I quit the newspaper in midway through editorial conference.
Do we think there was a leaning on?
We do, because Lord
Lord
Hollick, who at the time owned the paper, was a very close friend of Lord Mandelson's.
Lord Mandelson's got lots of very close friends in very influential places.
And yet here we are, sign of our times, 27 years later. He's happy to pose for photographs in the papers.
He's still together with the guy
and they're still together.
About, though, to
and
be
I
fair.
knew that they were a happy couple and very. I think I called him his snake-hipped Brazilian lover.
Oh,
as I recall. Looking at the photographs now of Ronaldo, I couldn't say that now.
We have come on a bit, haven't we, Andrew? In the
Amazing
sense that
times.
I don't know if it would still be a story
Wouldn't
today.
Wouldn't it be a story now?
To be
Nobody would
outing a
care.
cabinet minister as gay, nobody would mind.
Well, no,
care, right?
of course not. Nobody would care, and who does care?
Well, let's see if we care about the next story. Sue Gray's son is wannabe Labour MP.
Funny that.
Isn't it? Now, is this nepotism? We've got Sue Gray obviously having moved from being the resolutely impartial civil servant...
The most impartial civil servant we've ever heard of.
To becoming Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. And now, lo and behold, we discover that her son... He's not got a seat yet. He's not been selected for a seat, but he is a parliamentary candidate for Labour. He's a potential parliamentary candidate.
Yeah, remember, Sue Gray, of course, went from astonishingly the custodian of ethics in government to... which meant she conducted the Partygate inquiry to Boris. Some people say she pulled her punches. I think the report finished off Boris Johnson. Job done, would say Keir Starmer. Then we discover that she'd been in secret talks with Keir Starmer about becoming his Chief of Staff. She is his Chief of Staff now. I saw her at the Labour conference conference. She fixed me with a death stare.
Did you not have a little chat?
Tried to. Back off.
Oh.
I said she's party activist. Back off. She doesn't talk to the press.
Oh, OK, fair enough.
And now
she's not media-facing.
No, but now we discover her son, who, to be fair, has been a Labour Party activist for many years and is the chairman of Labour's Irish group, is on the short list now to be Labour candidate in a very safe, winnable seat. He'll be a Labour MP at the next general election. And I'm sure the fact his mum, who runs Keir Starmer's office, will make no difference whatsoever to him whether he gets that. None whatsoever. It'll all be about merit and ability.
Well, if she's not media-facing, perhaps he is, and we hope that you'll get him on your show, which returns tomorrow, Andrew.
It does, with Bev Turner.
You're back. Tell us what time so we can tune in.
9:30 a.m. It'll be packed and lively through to noon. It'll be good to be back on air.
24 hours' time. Keep tuned so that you can watch Andrew and Bev on their show.
Lovely to be with you. Will you have me back?
Of course I will.
Very
Always.
Nice.
Lovely to see you on this Sunday morning. Thank you very much to Andrew Pearce. As we say, he's back at 9:30 tomorrow. Now, we've got a lot more to come on the Camilla Tominey show. I'm going to be interviewing two experts on Israel and the conflict there. I'm also going to be speaking to James Schneider, who's Jeremy Corbyn's former head of comms, who's going to be debating with Justin Cohen, the news editor of the Jewish News, about the situation in Gaza. And I've got the Government Science and Technology Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, coming up. But here's the weather first.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was fairly unsettled, but what will Sunday bring? Well, last night's rain is now across northern England and Scotland, bringing some fairly heavy and persistent rain here for much of the day. Elsewhere, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers, and these will be most frequent and heaviest across southern and western coasts. It's the central slice of the UK that's going to see the driest and brightest weather and feeling pretty pleasant in any sunny spells here, away from the strong winds across the north and south coast. So as we go through tonight, that rain is going to continue across eastern parts of Scotland. Showers continuing elsewhere as well, but still a few clear spells, especially in the east. And this is where we're going to see some of the lowest temperatures as we go through tonight and to the start of the new working week, but still not expecting a frost around for Monday morning. So through Monday then, it's another day of sunshine and showers for many though. We will start to see those showers easing a little though along the south coast as we go through the day. Rain continuing still though across eastern parts of Scotland. They're becoming slightly more patchy in nature, and those winds now coming from the north across Scotland, so feeling slightly cooler here, still clinging on to something slightly warmer across the south though.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey show. Now, we're just waiting for Michelle Donnellan to be ready to speak to us. She's the Secretary of State for Science and Innovation and Technology. We're going to be discussing AI, so I'm going to bring Andrew Pearce back into the conversation. Are you worried about the march of AI? Yes. Are you and I going to be out of jobs come 2030, do you reckon?
Might be even sooner. I'm really worried. I can't bear the fact that AI can write a piece that you and I do, our day job, and at some point AI is going to be able to do probably what we're doing here. I'm really worried. And it does many good things, but it's a sinister side that really disturbs me.
The humans have to be in control of it. I mean, I remember speaking to somebody who's very high up in this world, and he was like, it's not like the Terminator. You know, you're not going to get the machines taking over. And I think, well, actually...
I'm not sure that's right. Sorry. I think that already they're getting too big for their own boots and too clever by half, and that's why Rishi Sunak is convening this conference. He's had a lot of criticism, hasn't he, that whether he should have invited China.
And China are definitely going, but other world leaders aren't. I'm going to ask Michelle Donnellan this in just a moment. Why is this summit being snubbed?
I don't get it, but he deserves credit for it, because what he wants to look at are the dangers of AI.
I think she's ready. Thank you very much,
She'll tell you more.
Michelle Donnellan joins me now. Lovely to see you this morning, Secretary of State. I just wanted to start on the AI... Lovely to see you. I wanted to start on this AI summit. So we know that China are coming, but we don't think that we're going to have any representation from the US, Canada, Germany, France, Japan or Italy. So is this summit being snubbed by everyone but the Chinese?
No, I mean, that list that you've just read out is completely wrong. Basically, we haven't produced the guest list or who's RSVP'd. Yes, because this is a summit of this scale, you would expect that. Hence why there's been speculation over who's coming. But what you will see next week is that we have every corner of the globe in attendance. We have the top companies that are working in this space. We have some of the best and the brightest thinkers from across the globe in civil society. We will be having a really targeted discussion around these highly capable models, around the risks and the opportunities for the very first time, I should add.
OK, so who's the most senior world leader who's attending apart from Rishi Sunak then?
I can't go into that because we have had a clear policy not to give a running commentary on the guest list, but you only have a few days left to wait and see. What I can tell you is you will see representation from across the globe, and the engagement and the level of interest in this summit has been extremely high because it's very timely. The next set of models will be coming out next year. We have a short window now to be very proactive, be on the front foot, drill into the risks, properly understand those risks, so that we can seize the opportunities for our public services, for our NHS,
but we do know,
transport network.
But we do know who isn't going. We know that Emmanuel Macron isn't going, Joe Biden isn't going. So, I mean, can you have a global summit without some of these key heads of government attending?
Well, the Vice President of America has already come out and said that she is attending, and obviously she's extremely senior in terms of representing America. So I don't think it's fair to characterise it as not having the heavyweights around the table. We have day one and day two. On day one, we will see multiple of my counterparts there. We will see representation from all of the big AI companies as well as smaller ones as well. And as I said, great wealth of expertise from civil society.
Okay.
Academics and scientists to add to that debate and conversation about what more can countries do, but also what more can the companies do to really put up the right guardrails and safety processes so that we can lean into this. We can get those opportunities.
So are Liz Truss and Ian Duncan-Smith worrying unnecessarily about the presence of the Chinese? Obviously, there is a concern about Chinese hacking, and you're inviting them to our AI summit.
Well, this isn't just our AI summit. We are, of course, convening the world for the first time, but this needs to be a proper global conversation. And let's face it, it is undeniable that China are a leading AI nation. They're not just consumers of AI, they're producers of AI as well, the second in the world. If we're going to have a really productive conversation, if we're going to be strategic about this, we have to at least try to talk to and work with China. Absolutely, there are areas where we won't want to inform them about certain parts of our work because of national security, but we need to at least try and bring them to the table. It's akin to climate change. If we're going to really have an impact, we need to work together.
OK, let's move on to just another story that's on the front page of the Sunday Mirror. Do you think that your colleague Tom Purseglove should have been out campaigning this weekend with Peter Bone following his suspension from the Tory party?
Well, look, I don't know the full details.
He was out campaigning with him this weekend.
This was no, it's my understanding that it was a local campaign action day for a local by-election. Obviously, Tom, as the local MP, would be there. Peter Bone also happened to attend.
Should Peter Bone have been there?
That's a question that you need to ask Tom.
I'm asking you, though, should Peter Bone have been there?
We have stripped the whip. Yes, well, what we have done is we have stripped the whip from Peter Bone very swiftly. There's obviously been an investigation. He's been suspended from the House as well. I was not obviously in that area. I'm an MP in a different
Should
region,
he have been there?
What I can tell you is the government has acted quickly here. Well, that is a decision for him. He is no longer a Conservative.
What do you think,
so one would argue he shouldn't therefore be campaigning. Well, he shouldn't therefore be campaigning on behalf of the Conservative
he shouldn't have been there.
A Conservative MP would be my view.
So he shouldn't have been there?
My view is if you're not a Conservative, you shouldn't... Well, yes, but I wouldn't put it as simple as that. I'd say that if you're not a Conservative, you shouldn't be advertising and promoting the Conservative Party. I mean, that seems like common sense to me.
Let's move on to the situation in Gaza. We know a particular case is Humza Yousaf's family. I know there are plenty of others. This is his in-laws live in Dundee. They're British citizens. Can you give us any insight at all as to how the government might be helping Humza Yousaf's in-laws get out of Gaza and indeed other British citizens?
Yeah, as you say, there are multiple families up and down the UK that are deeply impacted by this, and I just want to say that my thoughts and prayers are with them as they go through something that must be absolutely awful. And there are 200 people, I believe, on the ground in Gaza who have registered with our Foreign Office that are British nationals. We are trying to ensure that we can get that border open so that we can get those people home and we can maintain contact with them. And I know that the Foreign Secretary is prioritising this area. In fact, I spoke to him just last night and he reassured me by saying this is one of his top priorities.
Do you think that the police should be treating people who cry for jihad on the streets of London for hate crimes?
I think that we have very stringent laws in this country around terrorism and also the Public Order Act, and the police should be using the full weight of the law to ensure that people aren't inciting.
Are they not at the moment?
Hatred. It is not okay. It is not okay to be shouting jihad on our public streets. The Home Secretary has been addressing these issues directly with our police, and we continue to talk to them to make sure that they are utilising the full weight of the law to ensure that we can maintain public order and we can protect our citizens, which is the top priority of any government.
So is Max Hill, the head of the CPS, wrong then? Because he says that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a hate crime.
So, look, operational decisions are in the hands of the police. They are operationally independent. And, of course, they will have more information around the context of things, etc. But what we are saying is our law is robust. It needs to be applied in that fashion. It is not okay to incite violence or hatred on our streets. It is not okay to be doing that in relation to prescribed terrorist organisations as well.
Is it right to be saying from the river to the sea on the streets of London when everybody knows what the implication of those words are for the Israelis?
Well, yeah, on that very phrase, the implications are the eradication of Israel, which is deeply not just offensive, but also deeply dangerous in terms of its sentiment, if that is how it is being applied. So the police absolutely need to be mindful of that. And the Home Secretary has been very clear, and I believe wrote to police forces on that very topic, along with others.
Ms Donlan, very, very briefly, because we're running out of time, should universities also clear up their act when it comes to Jew hate?
Anti-Semitism has no place in any part of our society, including our universities. That is something that I was very strict on when I was Universities Minister, and I know that the current Department for Education ministerial team have been too. They have written to all universities already and reiterated that, because, look, our universities are where the minds of tomorrow are shaped. It is not acceptable for anti-Semitism to be allowed to proliferate.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, Michelle Donlan. Lovely to speak to you. Now, despite flying high in the polls this week, Starmer's Labour Party has been engulfed with infighting over how to react to the Israel-Hamas war. I'll be speaking to one of the...
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. In just a minute, I'll be asking the longest-serving Muslim MP in Parliament, Labour's Khalid Mahmood, whether Keir Starmer has lost his grip on his increasingly fractious party. But first, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you very much and good morning. It's 10 o'clock. This is the latest. There are reports this morning of residents in Gaza breaking into aid centres and warehouses in a desperate search for vital supplies. The United Nations described it as a worrying sign that civil order is starting to fade with the ongoing conflict giving way to a humanitarian catastrophe. Despite assurances from Israel that aid trucks will be allowed into Gaza, the UN says supplies crossing the border from Egypt are insufficient. Last night, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the second stage of its war with Hamas has begun and warned of a long and difficult campaign ahead. A group of Israeli activists have held an anti-war demonstration in Tel Aviv. Protesters blocked a road near the Ministry of Defence, holding up banners claiming war has no winners. They also called for a ceasefire and the return of hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu met some families of hostages yesterday, reassuring them their release is part of the country's military goals in Gaza. And as you've been hearing this morning, the Hollywood actor Matthew Perry, star of the legendary sitcom Friends, has died. He was 54.
This guy was me, and it was me who would learn that it was me who was the best you'd ever had. I'd be going like this.
Police were called to his home in Los Angeles, where he was found unresponsive in a hot tub. He became a household name as the dry and witty Chandler Bing, alongside Jennifer Aniston and Lisa Kudrow, among many others. The enormous success of Friends made it an icon of the 1990s popular culture. It ran for 10 seasons, with the final episode becoming the 5th most watched finale in television history. Warner Brothers said in a statement that his comedic genius was felt around the world and his legacy will live on in the hearts of many. Showbiz expert Kinsey Schofield spoke to GB News about the sad news.
This is a man who we have seen working on his body and challenging his body over the last few weeks. One of the last paparazzi photos taken of Matthew was on October 3rd as he exited a gym. So I know that there is speculation in regards to his past and, you know, could some of those demons have come back to haunt him when it comes to addiction? But he, over the last year or so, I'd say 2 years now, was very proud of his sobriety, promoted his sobriety, and was focused on being better physically and mentally.
And police are being encouraged to double their use of facial recognition software to track down offenders over the next 6 months. Policing Minister Chris Philps says the technology could be used to scan more than 200,000 images, matching them against the police database. He's also encouraging police to expand the use of live facial recognition so that offenders might be identified on the spot. Mr Philps says it'll allow police to stay one step ahead of criminals and make Britain's streets safer. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by simply saying, play GB News. Now it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. In just a moment, I'm going to be joined by Khalid Mahmood. He's the Labour MP who is calling for a ceasefire and helped to set up that meeting between Keir Starmer and Muslim Labour MPs earlier this week. As Israel finally looks to be launching its ground offensive in Gaza, we'll get some expert analysis on what's next. I'm going to be asking the MOD's former Middle East advisor, Sir Simon Mail, how the conflict is likely to play out. And international lawyer Natasha Hausdorff will be telling us whether she thinks the invasion is legal. I'll also be joined in the studio by Jeremy Corbyn's former comms chief, James Schneider, and the news editor of the Jewish News, Justin Cohen, who will debate whether the government should be calling for a ceasefire. And I'm delighted to be saying that I'm going to be joined by John Howard, Australia's second longest serving Prime Minister, who'll be in the studio a little later. We're going to be discussing everything from Israel to how he thinks the Tories are doing here in the UK. You won't want to miss it. But first of all, let's bring Khalid Mahmood into the conversation. He's the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. He's also the longest serving Muslim MP in Parliament. And this week he organised a meeting between Keir Starmer and Muslim MPs. Khalid, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. I was really intrigued by a piece you wrote, I think it was for The Times, criticising the Muslim Council of Britain for its response to the murder of 1,400 Israelis by Hamas. Do you not think that there have been enough mainstream Muslim voices condemning Hamas?
I think there's been a lot of Muslim mainstream voices now that have condemned Hamas. I, again, want to condemn Hamas for the 7th of October. I think it was totally barbaric. But I think also one issue has to be raised is that where was the responsibility of the IDF and the government to allow these people to run riot for 6 hours before any action was taken? I think so. The Netanyahu has some questions to answer as well for allowing this escalation to take place.
When we look at the protests that are going on in the streets of London, one thing that confuses me, and maybe you can help me with this, Khalid, is we've always heard that it is obviously Islamophobic to try and conflate in any way peaceful Muslims with any kind of terror atrocity. And yet at the same time, we have seen these pro-Palestinian marchers on the streets of London and elsewhere who seem to be happy to share a platform with people who are supporting terrorists, who are supporting Hamas. How do we square that circle, Khalid?
Well, I think those people don't help the cause of the people over the last almost 21 years since I've been in Parliament, that I've always fought against since 9/11, against terrorism, radicalisation in the UK and terrorism generally across the world. And that does no good to any community, certainly to the Muslim community, to have those people on board. What we've got to do is get the mainstream, the community, having a peaceful protest, highlighting the issues that he wants to highlight. And that's the only way forward.
When the Met Police and the head of the CPS talk about this many meanings of jihad, is that right? Or if people are calling for jihad on the streets of London in the context of a pro-Palestinian march, where also people are talking about Jews in very anti-Semitic terms, how should we interpret that use of the word jihad?
Well, first of all, any form of anti-Semitism is deplorable, has its anti-Muslim feelings also, I think, in the same way. But I think, look, there are lots of meanings to jihad. And I think also we have to be very careful, those people that are using the word jihad, to understand what environment that they're using it in. And I think it's difficult for the police to be able to determine that. And that's a real issue. I don't know what operational guidance that there will be for them to do that. But I think in order to have a proper representation of the people that are suffering in Gaza, you don't need to bring these sort of words into that arena.
On the subject of a ceasefire, Khaled, I know there are a mounting number of Labour MPs now calling for Keir Starmer to support a ceasefire. He's talked about humanitarian pauses. He's previously says that Israel has a right to defend itself. Where should the Labour leader go from here? Because this infighting within the party seems to only be getting worse.
Well, I think, look, I think Sir Keir met us, as you said, last week. He's agreed to meet us again as soon as we want to be able to meet and see whether how the situation progresses. So he's quite keen and happy to do that. I think, look, this has been a very quick evolving situation, and sometimes politically trying to keep abreast of it has been difficult. So Sir Keir, last week on Wednesday, issued a statement on pauses. I think now the United Nations are calling for a sort of, again, a cessation of violence. There's been a vote taken on that. And we need to move forward, whatever the term is, whether it's ceasefire, cessation of violence, or a pause. We need to stop the fighting and get aid into those people which are suffering hugely.
Is there ever going to be a hope, though, Khaled, of such a kind of diplomatic or military downing of weapons when Israel are having to negotiate with actual terrorists who have a founding charter which commits itself to the annihilation of all Jews? How do you broker a ceasefire with a terrorist organisation?
I think, first of all, look, I have no love lost for Hamas. I think what they're doing is putting a lot of people in harm's way, and I think also Israel has a responsibility to look at the amount of people that are being killed through the action that's going on. But as far as Hamas is concerned, what you will only resolve this by dialogue. Nobody will resolve this by any form of military action. And of course, the lives of those hostages that are there, it's important that we get those people out. Qatar has said that they will support to try and bring those people out, but there's got to be, again, a cessation of violence. But the only way to negotiate with Hamas is getting the Arab League, the people from the Gulf region, to sit together, work with them, and then will have to ultimately be a United Nations and Arab League force going into there and try and clear that out. That's the only way you're going to do it. You're not going to do it by a particular violence and war that's going on at the moment.
Yeah. What's your reaction to your colleague Shabana Mahmoud? She has said that Israel is guilty of collective punishment in Gaza. She's the Shadow Justice Secretary. Should she be using that language?
Well, look, what's happening at the moment in Gaza is very difficult. And when you've got people that have no choice in a very built-up urban environment, and those people are being attacked like that, I think there has to be a cessation in that violence to stop that. I think people are trapped. So what words can you use? I don't know what words are right to use in this example or not. But the fact is, Netanyahu didn't respond in time to allow these people to take lives of 1,400 Israelis.
I know, but it's still the fault of the terrorists. It's the fault of the terrorists for taking the lives, surely.
No, but why? No, IDF and the government has a responsibility to Israeli citizens to ensure that they keep them safe. In this instance, for 6 hours, they allowed these people to run riot and not do anything. Where's the inquiry into that? Where are the facts around that? And so you can't now just abuse the fact that we've got a right to defend because those people died. Where's the questions answered on that?
Khaled Mahmoud, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Now, I'm joined now by the former Defence Secretary, Michael Portillo, who will be presenting his GB News show, as usual, after this show from 11. Now, I recall, Michael, I think you were Defence Secretary around the time of the signing of the Oslo Accords about 30 years ago. Could you have envisaged then what is now happening in Israel?
Well, Israel has always been in this unstable position, surrounded by very hostile forces, and has had to arm itself to the teeth and indeed prevent terrorists from entering its territory. And the prevention of terrorists entering its territory is what is characterised by others as being the repressing of the populations in those places where the people are restrained behind fences and walls. So I suppose, yes, I mean, one could foresee a reigniting of violence. There was a period when Israel was very successful, of course, brokered a peace with Egypt after the Yom Kippur War, which was a catastrophic failure by the invading forces from Egypt and Syria. And so, you know, Israel has been through a relatively stable period. But in that period, it has not ceased to be in danger, and the forces against it, although they're now not neighbouring state actors, that it's not Egypt anymore, which is the threat. It is these terrorist organisations, which apparently are backed by Iran, which is, of course, not exactly a neighbour. So the threat is there, and one of the traps that was built for Israel was that the threat from terror was so great that it would have to take extraordinary measures that we don't associate readily with a democracy, like building walls and fences and restricting people's freedom of movement and so on. And all of that has built up a lot of public opinion around the world against Israel, but one has to sympathise with Israel because it is trying to survive in a situation where, as you've just pointed out, it is surrounded by people who are determined to destroy it.
No doubt you'll be covering this. What else are you covering on your show, Michael?
We're going to look at Ukraine, a somewhat forgotten subject.
Yes.
There's a marvellous set of documentaries on ITV at the moment about the Ukrainian children who've been taken into Russia, which is alleged to be a war crime. We're going to be looking at ESG, which is the guidance that's given to companies on economic and social and governance. Has this actually depressed share prices? Is it actually a bit of a scam? We're going to be talking to the Shadow Defence Secretary of Australia about Australia's attitude to China. And I'm going to be talking to a young man who has followed the steps of his great-grandfather. He was an RAF pilot who was downed in France, and he walked to safety through the Pyrenees from France into Spain. The young man has gone back and retraced his footsteps and met the descendants of those who gave him refuge on the way at great peril to
What
their
a
own
voyage
lives.
of discovery. Fantastic. Really looking forward to your show at 11. Now, do not move a muscle, because after the break, I'm going to be joined by two experts who'll tell me what we can expect from the impending ground invasion of Gaza.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now I've got that expert panel that I promised you earlier. Sir Simon Mail joins me now. He's the former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff and an MOD advisor on the Middle East. And Natasha Hausdorff also joins me, Legal Director of UK Lawyers for Israel. You may remember her from the week because she went viral for taking on the BBC and correcting them on a few matters. Lovely to see you both. Obviously in the newspapers today there's a lot of talk of ceasefire. Let's just first discuss whether that's viable, possible, desirable. Natasha?
Unfortunately, those calls for a ceasefire are simply playing into Hamas's hands. Every time there have been previous ceasefires, it seems to be a situation which Israel ceases, Hamas continues to fire. And let's not forget that there are still over 200 hostages being held in Gaza.
Would you be more in favour then of Keir Starmer's humanitarian pauses? I mean, there is a problem here, isn't there, in that the IDS are saying to people of Gaza, go south, go south. Hamas are quite happy to use those people as human shields. So you've still got this intensely, densely populated region with people just, as far as we can tell, sitting ducks.
Well, the key problem with humanitarian aid going in, as it is now continuing to do, is diversion to Hamas. We have seen a long history, heaps of evidence, of Hamas continuing to divert aid to its own terror purposes. The key is to get the civilian population to the south of Gaza and ideally across the border into Egypt. That is what the international community ought to be calling for, because that's where they can be properly looked after and humanitarian aid can be provided without it being diverted to the Hamas terror operations.
So, Simon, I mean, what are the practical problems facing the IDS when it comes to trying to attack a terror organisation in a civilian population?
Well, they're huge. One always keeps coming back to Clausewitz. This is politics by other means. And so, as Natasha said, and many commentators, of course, they are very conscious, the IDF, the Israeli government, very conscious that the news cycle runs fast, the battle of the narratives continues. But the requirement, in fact, almost the imperative to crush Hamas is really, paramount in their security requirements now. Yeah. But they're also very conscious that Hamas will play the propaganda game, which they've done so successfully often. They'll continue to use Gazans as human shields. They'll use mosques. They'll use hospitals. But equally, the Israeli security forces will have to go, defence forces will have to go in. They're going in at the moment, as we know. There's been what we call preparing the battle space, shaping conditions. They're doing raids in there. They've clearly got a lot of an awful lot of surveillance above. They'll be using, of course, bunker busters to try and destroy the tunnels, take out the command network. We know they've taken out some of the top Hamas commanders. Yes. But eventually they will have to go in. And at that stage, of course, we will find the awful collateral damage, let alone, obviously, straight military casualties.
Yes. Let's talk about collateral damage, Natasha, because the sort of word on the street of London yesterday, as the marchers for pro-Palestine causes took to the streets, was that a ceasefire has to happen because at the end of the day it simply isn't fair that ordinary men, women and children in Gaza are the collateral damage of what the IDF needs to do to defend Israel from what happened on October the 7th. So is it right at all to accuse the Israelis of war crimes if women, children, babies get killed as collateral damage for Israel defending itself?
The only war crimes we have been seeing so far in Gaza are those perpetrated by Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organisations. Let's not forget, it is not just Hamas that crossed the border on the 7th of October.
But if the IDF are killing people in pursuit of their defence of their own realm, then isn't that problematic as far as the Israeli position is concerned, in accordance with the Geneva Convention, etc.? I mean, you know that there is a civilian population there, and yet still you are attacking Gaza in defence of what happened on October the 7th. So there is a dilemma.
The calls that we have been seeing and the rallies in favour of Hamas are perpetuating the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza and preventing Israel from exercising its lawful rights of self-defence. And we've heard from international lawyers also in the House of Lords that this is what calls for a ceasefire amount to. It is plain, and any international lawyer or military expert worth their salt has been clear that in every previous operation in Gaza, Israel has not only upheld the laws of armed conflict, but gone above the requirements. And when we compare that with conflicts around the world, the global civilian to combatant ratio is a very disturbing 9 civilians killed for every 1 combatant. Those statistics put out by the United Nations.
Do you not believe the statistics that have been put out by Hamas, stroke the health authorities, stroke the Palestinian authorities on how many people have been killed?
There are a lot of matters to unpack here. Certainly the numbers coming out of the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas-controlled, are not trustworthy figures. There's no distinction being made between combatants and civilians. If you were to tell me that those were all combatants, terrorists that were killed, I think we would all be congratulating the Israeli Defence Forces. The fact of the matter is that the death tolls in the Gaza Strip are arising from Hamas shooting fleeing civilians. We've had evidence of that. They're arising from Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets that are falling short in the Gaza Strip, indiscriminately killing civilians. We've had evidence of that. And they are directly the result of Hamas's use of human shields. These are the war crimes that we need to be talking about. But the allegations that are being levied at Israel are tone deaf to the proportionality initiatives that the IDF upholds. Those include, of course, the warnings, text messages to individual householders, leaflets being dropped, the knock-on roof tactic that has been discussed at great length. Those developments that Israel has sought to achieve together with requests for civilians to flee to the south, when they are being prohibited from doing so by Hamas roadblocks and Hamas bombing their own civilians, that is what the world should be calling out.
Let's bring Simon in now, just militarily. What can we learn from operations, say, in Iraq? And how does one deal with Hamas when you've got these tunnels, hundreds of kilometres of tunnels under Gaza? We've heard about the use, perhaps, of sponge bombs. What can you tell us about how we could perhaps even advise the Israelis on how to tackle this?
Well, there will be a lot of advice. You know, we've done a lot of what they call phibio fighting in built-up areas, training. The Americans have. The Israelis certainly have, because, you know, they built a sort of mini urban environment with tunnels, with cellars, with high-rise that they've used to train on. None of it will take away from the difficulty of this. But at the end of the day, if they're really going to try and establish a genuine security cordon, they're going to have to destroy that tunnel network. Which means they're going to have to dominate the ground above in order to go below.
Presumably
some of it
you
can be
can't
done with
destroy that without killing very many
bunker
civilians.
busters will do it. A lot of high explosive penetrative bombs will do it. But ultimately, if they really want to secure it, they're going to have to clear the ground above it in order to go below it. And again, as we know, and I back up Natasha on this one, there's no doubt about not just aid, but a lot of the complaints about electricity. Hamas are still funneling off electricity to feed the ventilation systems in their tunnels. It's a very wicked problem. But I think what they will know, because they're great students of military history, is the complexity, is the requirement to minimise civilian casualties wherever possible. But ultimately, if they're going to do this, what they can't do is another in-out, wait for Hamas to, regroup again. Back we go again. Meanwhile, Iran, there's a wider issue here.
I mean, you must be worried about wider problems in the whole region, right?
I think one of the big issues we've got is how much Israel can guard its northern border while conducting its operations in Gaza, or another intifada in the West Bank, or the Syrians making a go for the Golan Heights, or Iran encouraging Hezbollah to launch its... So it's a horrible tactical situation, but it's part of a much bigger security situation.
Natasha, I mentioned earlier you sort of went viral for your clarification of some of the points that were raised to you by a BBC journalist. Did you incur a lot of hate after that? What's it like at the moment being a relatively high-profile Jew on the airwaves and seeing the marches that we've seen on the streets of London this week?
Well, actually, the flood of support from around the world has been utterly extraordinary, and I'm only sorry not to have been able to respond to the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have written to say that they know a great deal of what I'm saying to be true and accurate, and that is reflected in reports also of the high-level military group in previous operations that Israel has had to be conducting in Gaza, but that it's so rarely heard on the airwaves, and that is something that I'm determined to challenge. So I take comfort and a great deal of strength from that support. I know that reasonable, sensible people understand as an exercise of common sense, not just international law, that Israel's track record of protecting civilian life is unparalleled. I mentioned that 9-to-1 global ratio. The last Israeli operation in Jenin in March of this year saw a combatant to civilian ratio of 0.6-to-1. It was a very different style of operation, but 0.6-to-1 is unprecedented in international affairs, in armed conflict, and that is testament to the measures that Israel takes to protect civilian life, measures that it's continuing here.
Natasha, Sir Simon, thank you very much indeed for your expertise this morning. Well, we're going to be continuing this conversation because I'm going to be joined by James Schneider, who's Jeremy Corbyn's former comms chief, and Justin Cohen, who's the news editor at the Jewish News, who'll be debating whether we should be calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Don't go anywhere, we'll be back in just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, as promised, I'm joined by James Schneider. He's the former comms chief for Jeremy Corbyn, and Justin Cohen, who's the news editor at the Jewish News. Lovely to see you both this morning. Let's start. Should there be a ceasefire, James?
Yes, there absolutely has to be a ceasefire, and that's why the overwhelming majority of people on Earth, the overwhelming majority of people in the UK and the US all support it, because it's plain common sense. You can see that you don't respond to the killings of one group of children with the mass killings of another group
But
of
Israel's
children.
got a right to defend itself against a terror attack, hasn't it?
Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. It does not have an absolute right to indiscriminitely kill children, to engage in
indiscriminately killing children, Justin?
War crimes.
But the fact is that if Israel was to engage with a ceasefire at this point, it would be raising the white flag. It would be the international community accepting that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself against the ultimate acts of barbarity. And it would be also a admission that this kind of terrorism could be exported elsewhere in the world. That's what would happen if Israel was to raise the white flag at this point.
I mean, isn't that a point? You know, what could happen if there's a ceasefire is Hamas could just regroup. They're terrorists. They're not really to be bargained or reasoned with. Do they then put down their weapons? What's to stop... If Hamas want humanitarian aid to come into Gaza and indeed for Palestinian people to be safer, why don't they hand back the hostages? Why don't they stop using people as human shields?
The reason why you need to have a ceasefire is there is no military solution to the dispossession of the Palestinian people. This is not going to be resolved. What will happen if Gaza is entirely flattened? If every single person that's even crossed the street near someone who's a Hamas operative has been killed?
Well, is Israel talking about flattening Hamas?
No, but it's not... I'm sorry, it's not flattening Hamas. If you have 8,000 civilians who have died, over 3,000 children, whole neighbourhoods completely flattened. That's not flattening Hamas. That is flattening the Palestinian people.
Justin,
that is flattening people. That's flattening children who have hope.
That's a good point.
Who have lives, who deserve to be alive.
There's a big difference between what happened on the 7th of October and what's happening now. There seems to be...
Yes, there is. One is of a hugely tremendous, larger scale than the other one.
There seems to be an absolute insistence from people like Jeremy Corbyn and other people to draw a parallel between the two things. On October the 7th was the culmination of a 10-month plan by Hamas terrorists to go into people's homes, to rape women, to behead children, to do the most unspeakable crimes. And Israel didn't want that. Israel is now responding to those acts to defend its citizens. It cannot have Hamas on the border and risk this happening again. No government could allow that to be the case.
Israel isn't defending its citizens.
But how do you suggest that it does defend its
Israel
citizens?
is not defending its citizens.
But how should it do it if it doesn't do it like this?
I'll answer. The hostages are made no safer. In fact, they're put far more at risk, which is why some family members of some of the hostages went to see Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier this week asking to delay the ground offensive, because very clearly negotiation is the way to bring back the hostages. And for Israeli security, for the security of people in Israel, the only solution, the only long-term solution is to end the decades-long dispossession of the Palestinian people. Gaza has been now, for 17 years, an open-air prison. People have tried peaceful, and I do not support armed... People have tried peaceful things. When, for example, March 2018, tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza marched peacefully, unarmed, to the border to protest against them being in a prison camp. They were shot with snipers. Over 200 unarmed protesters killed. Over 6,000
You're describing
people.
Gaza as an open prison.
As David Cameron did.
Justin?
James, it depends how far back you want to take this, but let's go back to 2005, for example, the disengagement from Gaza. Israel ripping its own citizens out of their homes forcibly. I remember covering the fallout from this on our front pages. It was extremely painful for a lot of Israelis and a lot of Jews. But it did it in order to hand back a piece of land that it had been asked for a long time by the Palestinians and by the international community to hand back. It handed it back, and now look what's happened. We've had decades of rocket attacks from that strip, and now we've had the launch the most barbaric attacks that this world has seen for decades. What do you want to be done about Hamas on the border of Israel? That's the question.
Israel has continued to occupy Gaza since 2005 under international law. The reason why Israel can shut off food, fuel, water, electricity, internet, phone lines is because it has a total blockade by land, by air and by sea of Gaza.
How is Hamas firing rockets if it doesn't have any power?
How do you mean?
Well, Hamas clearly has been stockpiling utilities, right, in the tunnels.
Perhaps they have.
But what's your explanation for why they aren't helping the people of Palestine? That they're the government of this area and they are not helping the people of Palestine, because we understand that they're stockpiling fuel and supplies for their own terror attacks.
Israel has an extremely advanced, extremely effective defence shield, the Iron Dome, against Hamas's rockets. Hamas's rockets, it has fired thousands of rockets over the last two decades, and I think 34 Israelis have been killed by those rockets.
James,
now,
come on, you know better than that.
The threat from Hamas's rockets does not legitimise the complete destruction of Gaza, which is taking place now, and the loss of thousands of children's lives.
The intention of each and every one of those rockets is to kill civilians. Yes, Israel has indeed invested in the Iron Dome. Hamas has invested in tunnels for decades. Its leaders, having a lovely time in Doha at the moment, have billions of pounds. There is no need for the Palestinian people, for the people of Gaza, to be in the situation they're in. The reason they're in that situation is because of Hamas.
No, it isn't. The reason why the people of Gaza are in the situation they're in is because they have been dispossessed and denied by an occupying power for decades. That is the reality. And now that power is killing children in a way which is utterly unjustifiable.
Can we bring it domestic for a moment? Because obviously we saw the Palestinian peace marches yesterday in the streets of London. Some say there weren't peaceful elements. Some say that some were using language which appeared to support not only the October the 7th attack, but a degree of Jew hate on the streets of London. Can we have a discussion about whether it is appropriate for protesters to be saying from the river to the sea?
It's entirely appropriate.
But
hold on, please let me answer.
It means the elimination of Israel.
No, it doesn't. Please let me answer. It's entirely appropriate. I'm very proud that we had 500,000 people on the streets of London yesterday calling for a ceasefire. That was what that protest was about. And it's probably the largest protests we've seen on the streets of London since those that opposed the Iraq War in 2003. The overwhelming majority of British people want to see a ceasefire, and they're raising their voice because that is the morally justified position.
Okay.
And any attempts, and there have been many, many attempts, to characterise these basic human progressive protests as being anti-Jewish. They're not anti-Jewish. I went on one, I marched with the Jewish lot.
It is anti-Jewish when people start protesting outside the Sydney Opera House and saying, gas the Jews, gas the Jews. Well, it is anti-Semitic when people start wearing pictures of paragliders on the back of their jackets.
People, of course, shouldn't say gas the Jews. That's unbelievably offensive. But to suggest that 500,000 people calling for dignity and life for children are somehow being anti-Semitic is a vile slur and is completely false.
So Justin, from the river to the sea.
Well, let's start on an element of agreement. I would almost certainly imagine that not every protester on the streets of London yesterday was anti-Semitic or pro-Hamas. And every time I've heard suggestions that they are from members of my own community, from other people, I have rebutted those with every sinew I have. But when you have people on the streets singing for jihad, singing for another intifada, and worse, repeating old chants, recalling battles between Muslims and Jews in which Jews have been slaughtered, that is not. That is anti-Semitic. That is not helping the Palestinian cause, and that action has to be taken by the police and the government, and before next Saturday, because that doesn't just that affects
you must
people on the
support the
streets.
police
British
cracking
Jews.
down on some of these rogue elements, because, as you say, they're giving peaceful marchers a really bad name.
So my largest priority is to have the biggest possible expression of public support for a ceasefire, because our government has a role in this conflict. We support Israel diplomatically. We give it weapons. That is the absolute priority. Of course, there are some fringe...
So Keir Starmer needs to pivot to his position finally,
Well, of
James.
course he does, but of course there are always fringe elements in some things, and there's some idiots who'll be idiotic. But let's be clear, the overwhelming majority of the British people want a ceasefire, and they're right to do so.
Where do those figures come from, James, actually?
YouGov poll 10 days ago.
Well, that's not a latest figure, and the
well,
fact
let's see the latest figure. I'm sure it's higher.
The fact is that Keir Starmer is...
Final point, Justin.
Final
point, quickly.
Keir Starmer is absorbing a lot of pressure to do what he's doing. Can you imagine what would happen if your former boss had been in power now?
Yes, it would be much better.
No, it wouldn't.
No, it wouldn't.
As a British...
Hamas and Hezbollah aren't friends, though, are they, James?
No, I wouldn't say
No,
they were,
indeed.
no.
All right, Justin, James, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Up next is John Howard, the second longest-serving Prime Minister of Australia. I'll be getting his views on everything from the war in Israel to whether he thinks Rishi Sunak is doing a good job as Prime Minister. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning. My name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So the first half of the weekend was fairly unsettled, but what will Sunday bring? Well, last night's rain is now across northern England and Scotland, bringing some fairly heavy and persistent rain here for much of the day. Elsewhere, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers, and these will be most frequent and heaviest across southern and western coasts. It's the central slice of the UK that's going to see the driest and brightest weather, and feeling pretty pleasant in any sunny spells here, away from the strong winds across the north and south coast. So as we go through tonight, that rain is going to continue across eastern parts of Scotland. Showers continuing elsewhere as well, but still a few clear spells, especially in the east. And this is where we're going to see some of the lowest temperatures as we go through tonight and to the start of the new working week, but still not expecting a frost around for Monday morning. So through Monday then, it's another day of sunshine and showers for many though. We will start to see those showers easing a little though along the south coast as we go through the day. Rain continuing still though across eastern parts of Scotland. They're becoming slightly more patchy in nature, and those winds now coming from the north across Scotland. So feeling slightly cooler here, still clinging on to something slightly warmer across the south though.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by John Howard. He served as Liberal Party Prime Minister of Australia from 1996 to 2007. He's the second longest-serving Australian Prime Minister in history. John, lovely to see you. You're over for this ARC conference.
I am.
Which we're going to be speaking about, freedom of speech and
and also
policies.
a defence of the achievements of Western civilisation.
Well, we should champion them, shouldn't we?
We
Denigrated
should always champion success.
Indeed so. Well, talking of success, you had a lot of success with your gun laws over in Australia. We've seen this horrific situation in Maine. The gunman has been found dead this morning, but at the same time, again, gun laws in America costing countless lives. Australia clamped down on this, and my understanding is you haven't had a mass shooting since. What could the US learn from the Australians?
Well, certainly our clampdown, which happened just after I became Prime Minister, and there was a mass shooting, 35 people killed by one madman in a remote area of Tasmania. We did something, and it had widespread community support, although it did cause a lot of opposition in certain rural areas because farmers legitimately had weapons as part of their daily work. It's easy from a distance to say the Americans should do this, that and the other. The history of that country is different. We didn't fight the British with arms to get our independence. They were happy to give it to us.
Yes.
And there's a different culture, but that having been said, I live in hope that our American friends will do something, but it will require enormous personal courage from an American president.
Indeed so. We were speaking just earlier, I don't know if you caught that debate, but I was talking about that horrific incident outside the Sydney Opera House where some protesters were calling for Jews to be gassed in the aftermath of the October the 7th attack. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people marching for Palestine on the streets of London at the weekend. there has been a suggestion, not least by our own Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, that multiculturalism has failed in the Western world. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, like, separately from this issue, I have my doubts about multiculturalism. I believe that when you migrate to another country, you should, as far as reasonably, be expected to absorb the mainstream culture of that country. Sure, retain your affection for Greece or Italy or wherever you may have come from, and we've been very successful. I mean, I constantly meet people whose ancestors came to Australia from Greece and Italy and Germany and the Baltic countries immediately after, or more recently from China and India. The most widely spoken foreign language in Australia now is Chinese.
Yes.
There are 1.4 million Australians of Chinese heritage. Now, that all works well. It largely works well, I think, because people are attracted to the foundation mainstream culture of Australia, which is open and tolerant, but also very proud of what our country has achieved. And I think if we put more emphasis on what our nation has achieved and what the Western world has achieved, and we're less apologetic and less inclined to say, oh, we're all to blame, the better we would be.
Has the recent rise in anti-Semitism, not just in the UK, but also in Australia, surprised you, John?
In Australia, I don't find a lot of anti-Semitism. I really don't. And I mean, the Jewish community is small, but very proudly Australian, and some of our greatest historical figures, without any doubt our greatest...
But you will have seen reports in the UK of the chanting of From the River to the Sea.
Oh, look, we've had some absolutely unacceptable. I mean, that demonstration outside the Sydney Opera House was shameful. I mean, people saying, gas the Jews, and that was a deliberate invocation of the Holocaust, which was the most foul deed in human history. 6 million people gassed to death because they were Jewish. Now, that is something that we should all be offended by. And having said all of that, I don't think the average Australian is anti-Semitic, and there are some anti-Semitic, just there are some who years ago were anti-Catholic or anti-Protestant. I mean, it's just... But I do think that this latest operation in the Middle East has brought out the double standards for a lot of the world. People have got to understand that the only way you will get lasting settlement in the Middle East is for there to be a full acceptance of Israel's right to exist behind secure, defensible boundaries. Now, until the entire Arab world does that, it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to see a lasting settlement.
What was your reaction to the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' response to this conflict? He seemed to be taking sides.
Well, I don't think he contributed anything. I mean, in the long run, the only basis of a proper settlement is to have a genuine two-state solution.
Yeah, but how is that possible?
Well, it's not going to be possible just by the Secretary-General of the United Nations calling for it or calling for a ceasefire. We'd all love a ceasefire.
Yeah.
We'd all love violence to stop tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. And the latest element in this long-running saga was the terrible attack by Hamas on the 7th of October. Now, that happened, notwithstanding the desire of a lot of peaceful Palestinians, a lot of peaceful Israelis to live together in harmony. And until the reasons for that are rooted out and destroyed, it's going to happen again.
Is the UN fit for purpose, do you think?
Well, I don't think it is fit for purpose, but having said that, I think some of its agencies do good work. I think UNICEF does good work. I think the High Commission for Refugees does some good work, but I think it's sort of plenary ministrations, if I can call it that, often fall well short of the mark.
If you were still PM, what would you be saying to Netanyahu right now?
Well, I would be expressing the strong, unqualified support of the Australian people for the right of Israel to respond with effective military force for what has been a heinous attack on its people.
Let's move over to matters in Australia. I was interested by all of the coverage of the no vote when it came to the Aboriginal voice debate. Was it important that the no vote won?
Well, I thought it was the right outcome. It was a very strong vote. I think it largely happened because deep down Australians recognise that we have a pretty stable, happy, successful, cohesive country. And when somebody comes along without explanation, without any strong argument and says, we've got to alter the foundation document, we say to ourselves, hang on, what's he up to?
Yes.
What's this mean? There is in the Australian nature what I call a deep Celtic scepticism. We don't like people coming along and say, I'll do this and the world will be beautiful tomorrow.
Yeah.
Our reaction is, what's he want? What's he up to? We don't like this. And then I think, seriously, that lay behind part of this very strong vote.
It was a convincing vote for no.
Oh, very
Do you
convincing.
think that has a positive knock-on effect when it comes to pro-monarchy sympathies?
Oh, look, I don't think there'll be a vote on the monarchy for years.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one.
I mean, there's a minister for the Republic now that
well, I
Albanese
think
is
we could
appointed.
pension him off at a very early age.
Really?
I think so.
How would you judge the King's first year on the throne to have been?
Oh, look, I don't wish to be in any way patronising. I think he's done a wonderful job, but it's the system of government as much as the person of the monarch that matters. And I think we have seen in recent weeks and months, indeed, some of the difficulties in the United States of an alternative to the parliamentary system. And that's not to say you can't have a parliamentary system without a monarch. I have to acknowledge that intellectually, but I think the whole package comes together rather well. And I think the attitude of many Australians is, gee, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Now, give us some advice to Rishi Sunak. The Tories are in a bit of a pickle. They're 20 points behind. Pressure on the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to cut taxes in the autumn statement. What advice would John Howard give this duo?
Well, look, I'm not falling for that. I've only met... I've only met Rishi once or twice. Look, I think he's, he obviously faces a huge struggle. He knows that. He's a long way behind in the polls, and the Conservatives have been in power for a long time, and they've been through a few Prime Ministers recently.
That's right. Can he pull it round?
A big pardon?
Can he pull it around?
Well, anything's possible. I think one of the things you've got to learn about modern politics is that it's a lot more fluid. When I was first involved in politics, and I think it's true in Britain as it was in Australia, you had a sort of 40-40-20 rule. 40% always voted for the Labor Party, for the Socialists, the centre-left, whatever you call them, and 40% always voted for our side of politics, which, of course, in Australia is called Liberal, a bit different but Liberal here, and 20% moved around. I now think it's more like 30-30-40, and I think you've got a far more fluid situation, so he may look to be a long way behind. Yeah. He is a long way behind. He knows that. But he's doing things, he's responding, and...
You'll probably agree he has to stop the boats. Does he need to cut tax in the autumn?
Look, that is entirely a matter for his judgment.
But is it politically expedient to offer that?
Look, people always like paying less tax.
Yes.
But strangely enough, they like to have plenty of government services.
Yes.
And the art of government is putting those two things into balance.
So you would say to the Chancellor, what? Make it a bit more red-bloodedly right-wing?
I would say some things to him privately. Publicly, I would respect the difficult job that he has, just as when I was Tony Blair's opposite number. I was, in fact, the only Australian Prime Minister that Tony Blair ever dealt with. They were on different...
One final word, John. Who would you like to see get the Republican nomination? Trump or someone else?
I couldn't vote for Trump if I were an American, no.
So somebody else?
No, somebody else, because he wouldn't leave the field when he was given out.
Indeed so. John Howard, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30. Of course, up next is Michael Portillo, who's going to be discussing all sorts of very interesting things. Have a lovely weekend, and thank you for your time this morning.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day.